No.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening for everybody joining us today for our second iteration of our ABAC Mastery course, Axiomatics Policy Companion. Joining me today is one of my colleagues, Dave Matthews, who is a long-term expert in data security. He's been with us now for just about a year and a half, almost 2 years, Dave. Dave is a technical expert, and you'll notice that as we start to go through this, these slides and demo today. But on to the performance. As I mentioned, this is our second iteration of our ABAC Mastery course. On the first iteration, with September long in the distance, we ended up going all the way back to school, really focusing in on the basics of policy modeling. And when we did that, what we were really doing is trying to focus in on authorization, the benefits of authorization, but really keying off of that challenge of authorization. Because we all recognize the fact that authorization is, it's a challenge we're solving. It's a challenge that organizations typically end up spending thousands or hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars every year on trying to solve themselves, and typically doing it in an isolated fashion. But when I look at the challenge of authorization, I look at it a lot like it's a bit of a maze, because we know that there's a center, we know that there's a starting point, but for the most part, most of us don't really know how to get started, and we don't even know what the center of that maze looks like. So when I break it down, when I think of the center of the maze or the goal, really what we're looking at is our use cases. And the center of the maze for every organization is going to be slightly different. You know, if you're in the banking organization or industry, you're going to be looking at open banking. If you're in manufacturing, you might be looking at ITAR or export controls. And that might be what we're trying to drive towards. But those use cases just tell us where we're trying to get to, but it doesn't tell us what we need along the way. And that's where things like our attribute sources start to come in. Because along the way to the center of the maze, we have to find our way through the different attribute sources in order to pull the different attribute values. And those attribute values that we're looking at might be things like trying to pull in your citizenship or your security clearance, because all of these different values start to go into how we want to build the policies in order to get to our final set of use cases. As you can see, it starts to become a fairly complicated set of options. Now, for years, what we've done to try to simplify that effort for organizations that we work with is we really try to break it down. And we simplify that by going into what we would call a natural language opinion or a natural language approach to authorization. This one is very simple. You know, students can view their own grades. Obviously, this is going back to our ABAC to basics first session. But when we start to really drill into students can view their own grades, you'll notice that certain elements start to highlight themselves, like students are able to view their own grades. Okay, well, that's great to be able to take a highlighter, but what does that really mean? So if we break that down even further, really what that's going to do is start to call out the different attributes, the actions, and the resources that we're looking at. So in our case, what we can do is say that the attribute source is going to be the user role. And that can be as simple as the student. If we were to get very, very specific, instead of it just being the student, then you can start to pick up on the fact that it might be Biff. We're actually going back to the future in this case with the Biff example. From there, then we can actually start to look at the verb. And the verb in this case of view is typically going to be the action that we're going to key off of. And that could be something like view, edit, access. Think of all of your different CRUD-like examples. Now, all of that is good, but we need to know what the resource or what the user is trying to actually access. So that's where we start to get into the resources and even looking at the relationship between the user or the attribute and the resource that they're trying to access. Now, what I would say is, as you can see, this really helps declutter that maze and gives you a little bit more of a straight path from start to finish. But unless you really know what you're doing and unless you really know what you're trying to get to, this is still, I would say, fairly complicated. And what it really doesn't do is help drive towards the vision. And with that, I'll hand it off to Dave to actually key in on how Policy Companion actually helps relate to our vision.
That's brilliant. Thanks so much, Matt. So hi everyone. Yeah, I'm Dave Matthews, one of the professional services consultants here at Axiomatics, and I'm going to take you for a demo of Policy Companion itself, and just give you some examples of how this is sort of even in my own approach, working with customers and partners and similar there. How in my own approach this has eased that transition from an idea of attribute-based access control or policy-based access control, from the idea into getting that into a realization, actual code and actual policy that we can implement. And so, yeah, starting just with the vision itself, at Axiomatics, we have a vision to enable organizations to achieve zero trust through orchestrated authorization. And that sounds really easy when I say it aloud, but in practice, this does require a lot of planning to accomplish. We need to understand the different components within authorization access control policies and how they all fit together. And we don't necessarily have an easy button that we can just press to achieve zero trust within an organization, but we do have some tools that can help us along the way. Here at Axiomatics, one thing that we came across, and last year in particular, we focused around this area. We looked at, where could generative AI help make that transition a bit easier? And, AI itself has been a bit of a buzzword for some time. I've been told that AI is going to be coming to steal my art. They're welcome to it. My ideas, they'll get depressed. But even my job. And which does get concerning sometimes. But the truth is, generative AI, particularly generative AI that powers Policy Companion and similar, it's actually made my job a lot easier. It's made me look a lot better at what I'm doing. So when I sit down with a new customer and they come to me with, what they have is a pretty good idea of how they want to achieve zero trust through orchestrated authorization, well, my brain starts ticking over because they've just described what they want. And now I'm thinking, okay, how do we fit all these different parts of a policy together? And before the meeting's done, I'm already defining their access policy. I'm starting to ask myself, who's the access subject? How are we going to define the resources that we want to protect? And now I'm thinking about enforcement points and similar there. And that's, that's not untoward. That's actually what goes on, when we come to managing an authorization policy. When we come to defining that, we have those different steps. We need to understand the who, the what, the when, the where, the how, and then we map that policy and that rule structure, whether that's through mind maps or charts. We use Excel spreadsheets even, but basically like what Matt showed earlier, where we take a simple statement and then we map out, okay, well, how do these attributes fit together? In a large organization and enterprise and similar, this process can take considerable time. There can be days to weeks where we have different business units coming together. And we basically help to determine, first, how do we model the policy? And then how do we basically get together so we can meet that requirement? We can connect to various attribute sources and similar there. With Policy Companion, we can streamline a lot of this process. We can actually take a natural language statement from a business user, someone who may not even be familiar with authorization, and we can turn that into policy. We can go direct from the statement into an alpha policy and have policy as code that can be implemented straight off the bat course, in practice, we probably won't do that. We won't go from an idea to production in a matter of minutes. But Policy Companion can really help bridge that gap in terms of breaking down and understanding the various components that go into an authorization policy. So the tool itself is called Axiomatics Policy Companion. It's a web-based application and is freely available to all now for anyone who wants to check this out and get an understanding of the tool itself. Policy Companion has 3 components inside of it. So the first part is we have the policy coach. And the policy coach itself helps you to define or formulate the requirement. I like to say it structures the requirement for you. So you put in a natural language statement into Policy Coach. And you see there at the bottom where we've dropped one in, students can view their own grades. It then breaks that down basically into those various components: the who, the what, the when, the where, or the principle, the action, the resource, and the effect. So the coach can also offer suggestions along the way. So as we start to build the policy, we may then have the coach help us to perhaps add a bit more structure around the requirement there. And in the various parts, the way this comes together is that we start with getting basically a definition of the attributes that we need to consider, how these might be formed together. And then it can give us an alpha policy recommendation. So it can actually give us the code within the authorization language that we use within Axiomatics. Coach also provides you with a detailed explanation of the defined requirements. You can see there the principle, so the user or the who that this policy will affect, and then the action, the resource, and the condition, and similar them. And finally, it will summarize that policy back to you. So Axiomatics takes the statement you've put in, it basically gives you recommendations, and then it gives you back that recommendation in near enough a natural language statement, something that's easy to understand, perhaps for someone who, again, isn't quite familiar with authorization, perhaps isn't from that same background there, but now they have a good understanding of what's going to come together. Once you have that natural language statement, you're happy with it. Perhaps you've put it into Policy Coach. It's giving you some recommendations. We've gone back and forth, and we get a bit of a better understanding of, this is the statement. This is how we want to put it together. We can then put this into the policy generator. And what the policy generator does is it simply takes that statement and it turns it into code, into alpha code. The companion also provides you with some examples of attribute names and namespaces. These are different components within a policy within the alpha language. And if you need to make any changes to these, perhaps you already have a namespace, perhaps you have a naming convention within your organization. You can update those there in the right-hand side field to make sure that the attributes and those different components match the naming requirements from your organization. Regenerate the code, and then you've got a policy that's ready to be imported into additional policy sets, perhaps combined with additional policy sets, or just simply converted into an authorization policy. The third component we've got within Policy Companion is the interpreter. So what the interpreter does is it translates existing policies back into natural language text. So if you come across a legacy statement, a legacy policy itself, you can then take that, put that into Policy Companion, and what comes out the other side is basically a summary that tells you, oh, this is what it's going to do. So you can see there, I've just taken a policy that was generated by Policy Companion, and then I've turned that code back into a natural language statement, which tells me students are allowed to view their own grades. And then, in fact, it expanded on that. All other users are denied access to the student grades. So it's very straightforward. You're able to then sort of streamline that process from the idea into an actual policy statement or policy code. But probably the best way to do this is actually go into an actual demo and take you through. So with that, I'm going to switch screens. just refresh to make sure everything's all awake. So I'm logged into Policy Companion here. We're straight in. Policy Companion itself is it's basically a SaaS service that's sitting, that's running. There's no information that's being sent back to Axiomatics. It's not being shared or accessible externally. Actually, we've got some documentation around how we protect that data there, that it is isolated to the instance that we're using here. So when I sign into Policy Companion, of course, I log in with the account credentials that have been provided. And then I can go through, and I've got the different tabs, the coach, the generator, and the translator. And to start with, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just simply take a statement here, and we're going to say managers can view purchase orders. We hit analyze, and Policy Companion is going to generate the requirement itself, the structure of the policy, and that's it. We've got a policy that's been formulated. Nice job. Thanks, everyone. I'm Dave Matthews, and this is Policy Companion. Actually, no, it's not. So that first statement I've just put in there, that it does lack clarity. I can see straight away it lacks clarity and structure. So I may want to go ahead and ask Policy Companion, can we break this down a bit further? I can see there's a purpose. What's the actual policy doing? I can see the principle is, who does this affect? It's a manager. The action is that they can view purchase orders. That's the resource. When can they do this? Anytime. And what's the effect we're going to permit? But if I take that statement and copy that over here into Coach just to get some suggested improvements, what you'll see here is that it provides those breakdowns. So firstly, I get some recommendations. Oops, screen's just jumping back on me. So first recommendation is to clarify the policy scope and the purpose. So clearly define, what actually is the action of viewing, within the context of purchase orders. Are we talking about viewing a purchase order file, a document, a purchase order record, or are we talking about components within the purchase order? And you can see where it just breaks down the other attributes there. It starts to make recommendations around the role. I'm talking about managers, but we might be talking about sales managers. We could be talking about HR managers. They have very different roles and very different sets of data that they're looking to access. So we start getting recommendations around how we define these different attributes there. Same goes for purchase orders. Are we talking external purchase orders or internal purchase orders? Are we managing this for our sales team, or are we talking about the procurement team and the data that they're consuming? And of course, conditions. I mentioned, hours of access. At the moment, this policy allows you to get access anytime, but it might be a condition that we say, hey, you can only access these sales records from Monday to Friday during office hours. In which case, and maybe we want to say, and you can only access them when you're logged into the office on an authorized device. So you can increase, sort of the, the reach and the conditions and the structure around your policy to ensure that we've got, much more clearly defined rules about what happens there. I've also got the alpha policy definition. So again, it's given me a sample of the code. And I might just stop briefly here and touch on alpha itself. What is alpha? So alpha is an abbreviated language for authorization. It's a user-friendly and expressive language that we use at Axiomatics to define attribute-based access control policies. Alpha is our own language that was designed explicitly for building authorization, and it's quite lightweight. It's actually built on an existing language, which is XACML, but it lets the authors focus more on the core logic of their policies without getting bogged down in the more heavy and extensive syntax and markup language that comes with the XACML language it's built on. So within the policy itself, within an alpha policy, we basically have a policy name. So we've given it a name here, view purchase orders. We have a target clause. So again, the subject or the user that this will affect. We have the condition. So around, the action and combined with the resource, that's what we call the ABAC statement, or it might be relational. There might be more conditions to consider as well, and we call that REBAC, relational or relation-based access control. And then we have the effect, which is permit. So it's given us that structure there, very easy to understand and to follow. And then finally, it gives you an explanation just of the different components within that alpha statement as well.
I think,
and at the end, it just gives us that. Sorry, go on, Matt.
No, sorry. I was trying to time my jump in. I was probably about 5 seconds too early. But what I was going to say is, I think what I love about this, first off, it really brings us back to that older way of looking, which is breaking down a policy from natural language into all the different elements. You called it out really nicely, the who, what, where, when, why, and how. By showing you the purpose, the principle, the action, and so on. But where this takes us really to the next level is when we're thinking in things of natural language, we're not thinking about all these edge cases. What the policy coach is doing is it is that extra subject matter expert who's sitting beside you, helping you construct that policy in a better way. So again, managers aren't all created equally, just like the resource and purchase orders aren't all created equally. So we might want to break those down further and further.
That's it, exactly. And that's what's going on here is, typically you might start with a simple statement, which in my case there, managers can view purchase orders. But then I want to break this down. I want a bit more structure around this. So I end up breaking my language more into my statement down into something a bit more detailed, a bit more precise. So a sales manager should be able to retrieve purchase orders that are assigned to their region. So that has a bit more structured, sort of rule sets around. And Policy Companion will take that updated statement there and basically formulates the requirement. If I wanted to, again, I could ask Coach for a bit more, are there any additional recommendations, any other suggestions? And typically it'll come back and just with reminders around, specifics within the, within the actual policy itself. If we're using an attribute that defines region, then we need to make sure that we have clearly defined regions. And it can make suggestions such as I had one earlier today, which was, hey, if there's no region, how do we account for a user that has a sort of, of no region or a stateless user? What do we do with that? And it's quite, that can be an actual proper scenario. Is a user comes to you and they're outside the reach of this particular policy we're putting together. So maybe we have, we have a decision point where we put them into a process that they can then request access. Perhaps there's a break glass procedure that grants the user access in this instance, but it's also going to trigger an additional alert or a notification so that, a security team or an identity team is aware that, hey, we've got some users accessing this resource. They don't quite meet the criteria here. We need to, we need to go back and review the rules or perhaps review the attributes that we're using to identify which regions and where these users are coming in from. But yeah, once you're happy with what we've got here around the policy, we can then take that statement, and I'm just going to copy and paste because I'm a terrible typist, and I'm going to paste that straight into the generator and tell Policy Companion, generate the code for me, please. So what it's doing here is it's taking that statement, and in a similar process with the coach, it then produces a fully realized statement there around the policy, along with some comments as well that can help a user who might be somewhere down the line interpreting, what's actually this policy doing. Well, it can help with some comments and some guidances. As I mentioned earlier, you can also make changes there. So in this instance, we have we have namespaces within our policies that identify like a project, or a particular location where this policy applies. And it might be we have particular naming conventions or requirements within the organization for how they should be named. So I could change this and I can say, well, we're not going to call it sales management. I'm actually building this policy for perhaps let's say I'm building it for a paper company based in Scranton, Pennsylvania. I don't know, it's something similar. So I can change the namespace so that it's applicable and it's easier for me to follow when I'm applying this, within the wider authorization system that we've set up. And once I've updated that namespace, and perhaps I've updated some other attribute names or similar there, some identifiers, I can choose to update the alpha, so update the policy itself, the code, and we get a refresh. And now we've got the new namespace as well, paper sales. It can also change, sometimes you can see the layout changes slightly. Perhaps the alpha statement's rewritten slightly different, but the syntax tends to be, the syntax is valid for what comes out. And we could copy this statement now into a policy set and push that out onto our authorization system. Again, in a live environment, it doesn't really work like that, because while we could do this, perhaps in a test environment, I could drop that in. You may have a testing framework in place, some automation there where you want to first validate the code, make sure that it is valid and correct, and most importantly, that it's compliant with company policy. So I could take this statement here now and copy it, and I could go and paste it into some additional code. In fact, I've got one here that I don't want to be all Blue Peter on you, but I did make this earlier, and I could drop my code in and as another policy set within this alpha statement, and then we can push that out through our systems so that it gets picked up by the purchasing application and similar there. In this instance, we're just going to, what we're going to do is we've actually already got a fully realized code here. So I've got a couple of statements there. Employees or managers can view their own purchase orders. So I can already understand there where the code's had some modifications since I built it within Policy Companion. But I can already understand there with the target clause, who's the user affected. If they have the role of employee or manager, then we allow them, where they are the order owner, to be able to view a record. So that's great. That makes a lot of sense. But of course, my statement was about sales managers being able to retrieve purchase orders assigned to their region. And I can't see that here within the comments. I can see manager role. So, okay, I could probably try and interpret this alpha myself, where I can see the target clause as the manager. But then I start to get a bit wayward when I follow the condition, when I actually follow what are the ABAC conditions of this policy. So instead of me trying to work this out, let me just copy, and I'm going to go back into Policy Companion, and I'm going to just paste that simple statement and ask Policy Companion, can you interpret that for me? And what we get is a summary where I can understand exactly what was taking place there. So we can see there, managers can read purchase orders if the supplier's region and industry match the manager's region and industry. So that's a properly realized and structured statement there. So we have a better understanding. It's doing what I asked, which is a sales manager can retrieve purchase orders from their region, but we can see we have additional attributes such as an industry. And that could be, a manager, a sales manager in a paper company in Scranton shouldn't be able to see, I don't know, power generator records for a nuclear power plant that's also being managed, by perhaps one of our partner companies or similar there. That's an extreme example, but a lot of organizations, there's a lot of different approaches to businesses, a lot of different interests, and we want to make sure that data is appropriately protected and siloed, that we're applying zero trust where we need to. So that's how Policy Companion works altogether. I can, of course, go back to this fully realized alpha policy, and in fact, you can see there's quite a number of different decision points here within the statement. If I really wanted to get a quick summary and understand what all of this does, we could just take the whole code, copy, paste, and Policy Companion will come back and it gives me a summary of exactly what the different decision points are there. So you can see straight off the bat, employees and managers can view their own purchase orders. Managers can view purchase orders if the region and industry match their own. Senior managers can view any purchase order, and so on and so forth. And in fact, with that policy, if you wanted to see it in action, I can do that nice and quickly here as well, is if we go back This code has already been published and pushed out to the Axiomatics decision service. So I've got an application here that's already receiving this. And what we'll do is we'll just log back into this application. I'm still working within that paper company in Scranton, so I'm going to come in as Michael Scott. We're going to sign in here. This user is a manager. I know that because I watched the TV show. So when he goes to view purchase orders, he gets a list of different purchase orders that are available here within his region. So again, based just within Scranton, Pennsylvania. And if I was to log in perhaps as another user, let's open in a separate browser, keep it simple. We'll come in as another user within that organization, this time Pam Beasley. And we can see then as Pam signs in, goes to the purchase orders, and you can see there that rule that we talked about earlier where employees can see purchase orders where they are the record owner, or we can see how that applies immediately there. So that's, again, authorization, policy-based authorization, ABAC-driven authorization. That's it in action. That's taking the policy that we had generated there. We started out with Policy Companion, starting from the seed of an idea of sales managers can view purchase orders in their region to a fully realized application with zero trust access control. So that's what I had to show on Policy Companion. Again, to bring it back to us, there are three components there. Policy Coach structures your requirement. Policy Generator converts natural language into an alpha statement. And then the Policy Translator that converts the policies themselves into plain English, natural language, basically text that you can understand. This is what's happening and this is what's going on.
That was amazing, Dave.
Of course.
Oh, did I jump in again just too quick?
I was just about to pass the ball back to you.
Good. There was actually a question that came in basically as you were starting to go through Policy Companion.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, how do you access it? Is there, do you sign up for it? Is there a website? How does anybody access it, and who can access it?
Yes, so we have links available on the website. So it's invitation. So you put a request in for access, and then you'll receive that invitation. I don't know, Matt, if you have a promotional link or a link that you have to share as well. But that's how I got in. I went to our website, put in my email address, and within minutes I was granted access.
Oh, that's perfect. For those of you asking to get access, what we'll do is we'll follow it up in the LinkedIn presentation with a link in order to get to Policy Companion so that you too can put in your email address and get access. The follow-up question was, who can actually access it? We haven't put any restrictions at this point in order to access Policy Companion. We've made it available not just to our customers, but to our prospects as well as the general public. So if you're interested to look at how your policies could get converted into alpha-based policy as code, give it a try. Let us know what you think. With that, I don't have any further questions coming in, but I'm sure people will follow it up. As always, feel free to reach out to us at Axiomatics. Feel free to reach out to myself. It's always dangerous, but matt.luckett@axiomatics.com. I'll save you, Dave, but questions, comments are always welcome. With that, thank you again for giving us a little bit of your time today, and join us next time where we go through different vertical specific use cases. More on that to come in the coming weeks. Thank you again and have a great day.
Thanks, Matt.